Welcome to Learn-O-Pedia. Please subscribe, and if you like the videos, please give it a thumbs up. St. Patrick's Day is just around the corner. Let's look at some facts about him and the day. St. Patrick was a real bishop who lived sometime in the 5th century AD and played a role in the conversion of the Irish people from paganism to Christianity. Beyond that, it's hard to divine fact from legend, but why would you want to? Let's dive in and learn all about the miracle-working, wizard-stomping, dragon-slaying saint who's great the St. Patrick parades that we enjoy every year. St. Patrick was not Irish. The only things we know for sure about him come from the two works that he wrote about his own life, known as the Confessio, which looks like it should mean confession but is something closer to declaration, and the Epistolar, or letter, sometimes called the letter to the soldiers of Coroticus. The Confessio is basically his autobiography, so it's the source of most of the details we know about his life. St. Patrick was not Irish by birth. The young St. Patrick, whose birth name, according to later tradition, was Mewin Succat, was the son of a Christian deacon in Roman Britain and was kidnapped by Irish pirates at age of 16. He worked as a shepherd for 6 years, praying every day and asking God's forgiveness, until he heard a, presumably divine, voice telling him where to run to find the ship that would take him home and out of captivity. The bad news was that the ship was 320 kilometers, about 200 miles away, but he made it and returned to Britain. St. Patrick's may have been a criminal. Yes folks, St. Patrick was no saint. St. Patrick wrote his two works while awaiting the outcome of his trial. While he never explicitly names the crimes for which he has been accused, he does specify that he returned gifts given to him by rich women, did not charge people for baptisms or ordinations, and had paid for gifts that he had given to kings and tribal chiefs. Many people conclude, then, that the charges involved money trouble, particularly that St. Patrick had taken his position as bishop in hopes of getting that paper. And besides more details of dealing with chiefs and converting people, that is more or less all we know about the historical St. Patrick. St. Patrick, Wizard Smasher. The bulk of Mucku's hagiography of St. Patrick deals with St. Patrick's clashes with the various pagan kings of Ireland and the powerful druid wizards they kept on retainer. Two of the most powerful druids that St. Patrick encounters are two guys in the service of the king Loigair, named Lucette Mail and Locroo. After St. Patrick had lit a fire he wasn't supposed to, Loigair summoned him to his court to find out what this guy was all about. Once there, St. Patrick found himself face to face with the druid Locroo, who provoked him by making fun of Jesus. In a move that Mucku compares to St. Peter fighting the evil wizard Simon Magus, St. Patrick uses mind powers to lift Locroo into the air and smash him onto the ground until his brain was smashed to pieces. His encounter with Lucette Mail is somewhat more complicated, but it involves the two men entering a miracle contest to see who can control the weather better, escalating until the challenge basically culminates in the two guys daring each other's god to set them on fire. St. Patrick turned a man into a werewolf. St. Patrick once punished the Welsh king Verticus by transforming him into a wolf. While St. Patrick was in Ireland he became so disgusted with certain tribes that continued to resist his efforts to convert them to Christianity that he cursed them and condemned them to become werewolves. The curse was put onto the tribesmen and it caused them to turn into werewolves every 7 years. They would stay in wolf form for 7 years, then once the years passed they would turn back into humans, but only for another 7 years, then it was back to wolf all over again. It was a horrible vicious cycle. 7 years as a wolf, 7 as a human, 7 as a wolf, 7 as a human, until they died. But during their 7 years as a werewolf they weren't denied the sacraments of the church. In 1191 a man named Geraldus Cambrensis recorded the testimony of a priest that swore that he once gave a sacrament to a werewolf. St. Patrick banished all the snakes from Ireland. Legend has it that St. Patrick gave a rousing sermon that sent all of Ireland's snakes slithering off into the ocean. If only it were that easy. The Emerald Isle owes its lack of serpents not to St. Patrick but to the Ice Age and geography. The shifting glaciers of the last Ice Age left Ireland surrounded by water, making it impossible for snakes to reach it. Before then, the land that would become Ireland was far too cold for the cold-blooded creatures to survive. You can't banish snakes from somewhere where there were no snakes to begin with. I bet you never knew these words had Gaelic origins. Saint Patrick and the Shamrock. If the story of Saint Patrick driving the snakes out of Ireland is a late addition, the almost equally famous story of the Shamrock is even later. The shamrock has 3 leaves, but there's no historical evidence that Saint Patrick used it as a symbol to demonstrate Christianity. In fact, it's unlikely he introduced Christianity to the Emerald Isle at all, a feat with which he is often attributed. In the 5th century AD, the Pope sent Saint Patrick to Ireland with the mission of preaching to the Irish believing in Christ, so he didn't introduce Christianity to Ireland, he really just helped it along. As for the shamrock, Saint Patrick may well have used it to represent the Holy Trinity, but the shamrock already had symbolic significance in pagan traditions as well. Green was an important color to paganism because it represented rebirth, and the number 3 was as much a staple of paganism as it is of Christianity. Many pagan religions have 3 primary gods. Saint Patrick traditions. Saint Patrick is often associated with his feast day on the 17th of March, which has become a celebration of all things stereotypically Irish, especially in the United States. All the parades, green food, and alcohol poisoning is a pretty American take on the day, but that's fitting because in a lot of ways, Saint Patrick's Day as we know it is much more American than Irish. Saint Patrick Day, also known as Saint Paddy's Day, and traditions actually originated in the United States. The first St. Patrick's Day parade, for instance, occurred in New York City in 1782, and it became an annual event in 1848. Meanwhile, it wasn't until 1931 that Ireland held an official St. Patrick's Day parade. And as for alcohol consumption, it was not a staple of the holiday in Ireland by any means. In fact, until the 1960s, pubs in Ireland were closed on the 17th of March, in observance of the religious holiday. A little different from America's celebrations. Eating corned beef on St. Patrick's Day is an Irish tradition. In the 20th century, pork was much cheaper to raise, and of course eat, for the average family in Ireland. Corned beef is historically unheard of in Ireland, although salt-cured beef was an occasional meal. Like the holiday's modern celebration, eating corned beef started in the late 19th century. Irish immigrants bought corned beef from Jewish delis in New York City instead of the more common, in Ireland, St. Patrick's Day meat of cured pork, ham, bacon. Leprechauns and St. Patrick. Leprechauns were first written about in old Irish fables, so it makes sense that they'd be associated with the holiday dedicated to Irish culture. If you're not familiar with the original legend of the leprechaun, it goes like this. Leprechauns were small pint-sized men who worked as shoemakers and hid gold coins in pots at the end of rainbows. Legend has it that these tiny creatures were very hard to catch, because they were so small, but if you were able to catch one, you'd be granted 3 wishes by the leprechaun in exchange for setting him free. And here is an Irish blessing about leprechauns near a misty stream in Ireland in the hollow of a tree, live mystical, magical leprechauns who are clever as can be. With their pointed ears and turned-up toes and little coats of green, the leprechauns busily make their shoes and try hard not to be seen. Only those who really believe have seen these little elves, and if we are all believers, we can surely see for ourselves. Because of these old fables, leprechauns have been associated with Irish culture for centuries, likely even farther back than the original St. Patrick's Day. But they actually didn't become tied with the holiday until much more recently. In 1959, Walt Disney released a film called Darby O'Gill and the Little People, which was about an old Irish man and his experiences with magical leprechauns. While the movie was based in Ireland, it had a primarily American audience. Because leprechauns were already so heavily associated with Irish culture, and because this movie was released in the mid-1900s, around the same time St. Patrick's Day parades and celebrations became increasingly popular in the United States, the mythical creatures became a symbol of the holiday. So while they originally only existed in Irish folklore, today it's common to see people dressed as leprechauns in St. Patrick's Day parades and other events, although they're much less likely to be able to tell you where you can find a pot of gold. If you like our video, please give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe.